We know you guys love these stories, but most of you listening aren't subscribing. Our subs have been quite low this month, and we're really close to 20,000 subscribers, so please be a legend and smash the subscribe button. And like this video, it will really help support us. Thank you so much.
I'd never expected to find myself in a real-life horror story, but here I am. It all started when I matched with Jenna on a dating app. At first glance, I thought I was seeing things. She looked exactly like my ex-girlfriend. Same dark hair, same striking green eyes, even the same dimple when she smiled. I figured it was just a weird coincidence, so I decided to give it a shot. Our first few dates were great. Jenna was funny, smart, and seemed to get me in a way no one else had since my ex. We liked the same obscure bands, shared a passion for true crime podcasts, and even had the same guilty pleasure reality TV shows. It felt too good to be true. As we spent more time together, little things started to nag at me. Jenna would make offhand comments about places I'd been or things I'd done, but I couldn't remember telling her about them. She'd bring up inside jokes from my past relationship, laughing as if we'd shared them together. When I asked how she knew these things, she'd just shrug it off, saying I must have mentioned it before. The turning point came when Jenna showed up at my favorite coffee shop one morning. I hadn't told her I'd be there. It was just part of my routine. But there she was, waiting from a table with my usual order already waiting. That's when the alarm bells really started ringing. I started paying closer attention, and the coincidences kept piling up. Jenna's apartment was decorated almost identically to my ex's, right down to the weird abstract art prints. Her bookshelf was filled with all my favorite authors. Even her cat looked just like the one my ex and I had adopted together. It was like dating a carbon copy of my past relationship, but with an unsettling twist. Jenna seemed to know things about me that I'd never shared with anyone. She'd reference conversations I'd had in private with friends, or bring up embarrassing moments from my childhood that I'd rather forget. The final straw came when she casually mentioned a family tragedy that I'd never told her about. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. I confronted her, demanding to know how she knew all these things about me. Jenna's facade cracked. She admitted that she'd been following my online presence for years, piecing together every detail of my life. She'd studied my ex's social media, copied her style, and even had plastic surgery to look more like her. She crafted her entire persona to be my perfect match, based on everything she'd learned about me and my past relationships. I was horrified. The person I thought I was falling for was just a carefully constructed illusion. Jenna begged me to understand, saying we were meant to be together. She claimed she knew me better than anyone else ever could. I cut off all contact immediately, but Jenna wouldn't let go. She started showing up everywhere: my workplace, my gym, my favorite restaurants. It was like I couldn't escape her. She'd send long, rambling messages about our connection and how we were destined to be together. The situation quickly spiraled out of control. Jenna's obsession became all-consuming. She'd leave gifts on my doorstep, send letters to my family and friends, and even try to contact my ex. It felt like my whole life was being invaded by this stranger who thought she knew me intimately. I tried blocking her on social media, changing my routines, even considering moving to a new city. But Jenna always seemed to be one step ahead. She'd find new ways to contact me or pop up unexpectedly. The constant stress and paranoia were taking a toll on my mental health. One night, I came home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. Heart pounding, I pushed it open to find Jenna inside, wearing my ex's old clothes and cooking dinner in my kitchen. She acted like it was the most natural thing in the world, saying she wanted to surprise me with a home-cooked meal. I ran out of the apartment, called the police, and finally got a restraining order. For a while, things seemed to calm down. Jenna's attempts to contact me became less frequent, and I started to feel like I could breathe again. But then strange things started happening. I'd come home to find objects move slightly or catch a whiff of familiar perfume in the air. Sometimes I feel like I was being watched, only to turn around and see no one there. One day, I received a package in the mail. Inside was a scrapbook filled with photos of me, some recent, some from years ago. There were ticket stubs from concerts I'd attended, receipts from restaurants I'd visited, even a lock of my hair. The last page had a handwritten note: "I'll always be watching over you." Panicked, I decided to leave town for a while. I packed a bag and headed to my parents' house in another state. As I was driving down the highway, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw a familiar car following me. It was Jenna. I tried to lose her. taking random exits and back roads, but she stayed right on my tail. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We're meant to be together. I'll follow you anywhere. Desperate, I pulled into a busy rest stop and ran inside, hoping to lose her in the crowd. I hid in a bathroom stall, trying to calm my racing heart and figure out what to do next. Suddenly, I heard a familiar voice outside the stall. It was Jenna talking to someone on the phone. Yes, I've got eyes on him. No, he won't get away this time. We'll bring him in soon. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about a deranged stalker anymore. There was something much bigger going on. Who was Jenna really working for? What did they want with me? I realized I couldn't go to the police or my family. I didn't know who to trust anymore. As I heard Jenna's footsteps moving away from the bathroom, I knew I had to disappear. I slipped out of the rest stop and into the nearby woods, leaving my old life behind. Now I'm constantly on the move, always looking over my shoulder. I don't know if I'll ever be free of Jenna or the mysterious organization she's working for. But I do know one thing. I'll never again take for granted the power of privacy in our digital age. Because sometimes the person on the other side of the screen isn't just a harmless admirer. They might be crafting an entire life around yours, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I thought I'd hit the jackpot when I matched with Rebecca on a dating app. Her profile was everything I'd been looking for. A cute brunette with a passion for indie music and obscure films. We clicked instantly, messaging back and forth for hours each day. Rebecca always had the perfect response. Whether it was a witty comeback or a thoughtful observation about life, I felt like I could truly be myself with her. Weeks turned into months, and our online relationship deepened. We shared our hopes, dreams, and fears. I found myself falling hard for this girl I'd never met in person. But that was the catch. We hadn't actually met yet. Every time I suggested meeting up, Rebecca had an excuse. Her job kept her swamped. Her car broke down. A family emergency came up. At first, I tried to be understanding. Life happens, right? But after 3 months of this, I was getting frustrated. How could someone always be too busy for even a quick coffee date? Still, I didn't want to push too hard and risk scaring Rebecca away. I really liked her and wanted things to work out, so I kept chatting with her online, hoping she'd eventually find time to meet up. Finally, after yet another canceled plan, I decided enough was enough. I told Rebecca I needed to see her in person or I couldn't continue the relationship. To my surprise, she agreed. We made plans to meet that weekend at a local cafe. I was a bundle of nerves as I got ready that Saturday morning. I changed outfits 3 times, wanting to look perfect for our first meeting. As I headed to the cafe, my palms were sweaty and my heart was racing. But Rebecca never showed. I waited for over an hour, sending her messages that went unanswered. I felt like a complete idiot sitting there alone, nursing a cold coffee. Eventually, I gave up and went home, a mix of anger and confusion swirling in my gut. When I got home, I saw that Rebecca had blocked me on all our messaging apps. My texts weren't going through anymore. It was like she'd vanished into thin air, taking a piece of my heart with her. I was crushed. How could Rebecca just ghost me like that after months of talking? I thought we had a real connection. Had it all been fake? The next few days were a blur of sadness and self-doubt. I kept replaying our conversations in my head, looking for signs I'd missed. The more I thought about it, the more things didn't add up. So I decided to do some digging. I started by reverse image searching Rebecca's profile pictures. To my shock, they turned out to be stock photos. Her supposed job didn't check out either. The company she claimed to work for had no record of her. My suspicions grew. I spent hours combing through our old chats, looking for clues. That's when I noticed some odd language quirks and phrases that didn't sound quite right for an American woman Rebecca's age. After more investigating, I stumbled across a news article about romance scams. It described how scammers, often from other countries, used fake profiles to trick people online. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Rebecca wasn't real. I've been chatting with this scammer the whole time, probably a man in another country using AI chatbots to keep the conversation going. No wonder she always had excuses not to meet up. I felt like such a fool. How could I have fallen for this? I poured my heart out to this person, sharing my deepest thoughts and feelings, and it was all fake. Determined to get to the bottom of things, I dug deeper. I used some tech-savvy friends to help trace the IP addresses used to message me. It led back to a small town in India. I've also found similar profiles using the same stock photos on other dating sites. It seemed like the scammer was running multiple cons at once, probably targeting lonely people looking for love. The more I uncovered, the angrier I got. This wasn't just about me. How many other people had this scammer hurt? I decided to take action. I reported the fake profiles to the dating sites and social media platforms. I also reached out to the local police cyber crime unit to file a report. To my surprise, the detective I spoke to said they'd been investigating a ring of romance scammers operating out of that same town in India. My case helped provide additional evidence for their investigation. Weeks later, I got a call from the detective. They'd made a breakthrough in the case. Working with Indian authorities, they'd raided a small office building where the scammers were operating. They arrested several men, including the one believed to be behind the Rebecca profile. The detective explained how the scammers used a combination of stolen photos, pre-written scripts, and AI chatbots to con people. They typically targeted middle-aged or older individuals, playing on their loneliness and desire for connection. While I was glad justice was being served, it didn't erase the pain of the betrayal. I struggled with trust issues for months afterward. Every time I matched with someone new online, I found myself questioning if they were really who they claimed to be. But I refused to let this experience make me bitter. Instead, I channeled my energy into raising awareness about online dating scams. I shared my story on social media and even gave a talk at a local community center about spotting red flags in online relationships. To my surprise, many people reached out to share similar experiences. I realized how common these scams were and how rarely people talk about falling victim to them. It felt good to help others avoid the same heartache I'd gone through. As time passed, I slowly regained my confidence in dating. I became more cautious, insisting on video chats early on, and trusting my instincts when something felt off. I also focused more on meeting people in real life through shared interests and activities. One day, at a local indie music festival, I struck up a conversation with a girl named Sarah. We bonded over our favorite obscure bands and ended up talking for hours. As we exchanged numbers at the end of the night, I felt a flutter of excitement, and this time I knew it was real. I never expected to fall for someone like Adam. We matched on a dating app last summer, his profile showing a guy with kind eyes and a warm smile. After chatting for a few days, we met for coffee. In person, Adam was even more charming, listening intently as I talked about my job and hobbies. By the end of that first date, I felt like I had known him for years. Over the next few weeks, Adam swept me off my feet. He surprised me with flowers at work, planned romantic dinners, and showered me with compliments. It felt like a fairy tale. I finally found a great guy who treated me like a princess. Things moved quickly. Within a month, we were official. Adam integrated himself into every part of my life, getting along great with my friends and even charming my parents. I started spending most nights at his place, and we talked about moving in together. Looking back, I can see the red flags I missed. Adam's possessiveness seemed sweet at first. He always wanted to know where I was and who I was with. I thought he just cared about me and wanted to make sure I was safe. Slowly, Adam started criticizing my friends. He'd make little comments about how immature or irresponsible they were. He suggested I spend less time with them and more time with him instead. It was subtle at first, but over time he drove a wedge between me and my support system. My relationship with my family became strained too. Adam would get upset if I wanted to visit them without him. He'd guilt me into canceling plans, saying he'd be lonely without me. Before I knew it, I was seeing my family less and less. At work, Adam constantly texted and called to check in. If I didn't respond right away, he'd get angry. I started feeling anxious about my phone, jumping every time it buzzed. To keep the peace, I began updating him on my whereabouts throughout the day. Adam convinced me to quit my job and work for his company instead. He said we get to spend more time together, and I'd make better money. In reality, it just made me more financially dependent on him. Our world kept shrinking until Adam was at the center of everything. When I tried to assert some independence, Adam's true colors came out. He'd fly into a rage if I wanted to go out with friends. He'd accuse me of cheating if I was even a few minutes late getting home. The charming guy I fell for was gone, replaced by a controlling, jealous monster. I realized I needed to get out, but by then Adam had all the power. He threatened to tell my family about the abortion I'd had in college, something I confided in him early on. He said he'd send compromising photos to my old boss. He knew all my secrets and vulnerabilities, and he used them against me. Trapped and isolated, I felt completely helpless. Adam monitored my phone and computer, so I couldn't even reach out for help without him knowing. I was a shell of my former self, walking the eggshells to avoid setting him off. One day, while Adam was at work, I discovered a hidden folder on his laptop. Curiosity got the best of me, and I opened it. What I found made my blood run cold. There were detailed files on several women, their routines, likes and dislikes, personal information. With a sickening realization, I understood that I wasn't Adam's first victim. Among the files, I found a document outlining Adam's system for manipulating women. It was like a playbook for abuse, detailing how to love, bomb, isolate, and control. Seeing my own experience laid out as a calculated strategy made me feel physically ill. As I dug deeper, I uncovered something even more sinister. There were photos of women who looked drugged or unconscious in compromising positions. I recognized some of them from Adam's social media, ex-girlfriends he mentioned in passing. My heart raced as I realized the full extent of what I'd stumbled into. I knew I had to act fast. Adam would be home in a few hours, and if he suspected I'd seen these files, I didn't want to imagine what he might do. With shaking hands, I copied as much evidence as I could onto a USB drive. Then I cleared my browsing history and put everything back exactly as I found it. That night, I pretended everything was normal while my mind raced with escape plans. I waited until Adam fell asleep, then snuck out of bed and grabbed my emergency bag, something I'd hidden weeks ago when I first started thinking about leaving. As I crept towards the door, Adam stirred. My heart nearly stopped, but he just mumbled something and rolled over. I held my breath as I silently unlocked the door and slipped out into the night. I drove for hours, not sure where I was going. When the sun came up, I found myself in a small town I'd never heard of. I checked into a motel under a fake name, paid cash, and finally allowed myself to break down. The next few days were a blur. I used a prepaid phone to contact the police and a domestic violence hotline. I sent copies of Adam's files to law enforcement and sought legal advice about protecting myself. It wasn't long before the story broke. Adam was arrested, and more victims came forward. The media frenzy was intense, but I stayed hidden, working with the police to build their case. Months later, I sat in the courtroom as Adam was sentenced. He looked nothing like the charming man I'd fallen for. As they led him away, he caught my eye. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the mask he'd worn, that warm, kind expression, but it quickly faded into cold anger. As I left the courthouse, a weight lifted from my shoulders. Adam couldn't hurt me or anyone else anymore, but I knew the road to healing would be long. I never expected to find myself in the middle of a dating nightmare. It all started innocently enough with a swipe right on a dating app. That's how I met Brian, a charming guy who seemed too good to be true. We hit it off immediately, and before I knew it, we'd been together for over a year. Brian was everything I'd been looking for. He was attentive, funny, and always knew how to make me feel special. We had so much in common, from our taste in music to our love of obscure indie films. I thought I finally found my perfect match. Looking back, there were signs I missed. Brian was always busy, making it hard to spend time together. When we did meet up, he was glued to his phone. I brushed it off, thinking he was just popular or had a demanding job. I couldn't have been more wrong. It was a regular Tuesday when my world turned upside down. I was mindlessly scrolling through a dating app during my lunch break when I saw him. Brian's face stared back at me, but the name was different. John, 32, looking for a serious relationship. My heart raced as I read his bio describing a completely different person from the Brian I knew. In a panic, I searched other dating apps. To my horror, I found more profiles. Each one showed a slightly different version of Brian, with varying interests and personalities. There was Mike the outdoorsy type, Alex the bookworm, and Chris the party animal. All were active with recent photos and updates. I felt sick. How long had this been going on? My mind raced with questions as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. I wanted to confront him immediately, but I knew I needed more information first. Over the next few days, I created fake profiles on different apps and matched with Brian's alter egos. Each one had a carefully crafted backstory and personality. It was like he was playing different characters, adapting to what he thought each woman wanted. When I finally confronted Brian, he denied everything. He claimed the profiles were old or fake, made by someone trying to impersonate him. But his excuses didn't add up. The photos were recent, and the conversations I'd had with his other profiles were undeniably him. As I pressed for answers, Brian's facade crumbled. He became defensive and angry, accusing me of not trusting him. It was like talking to a stranger, not the man I thought I knew. In that moment, I realized the Brian I had fallen for never really existed. But the nightmare wasn't over. As news of Brian's deception spread, other women started coming forward. They shared similar stories of lies and manipulation. Some had been seeing him for months, others for years. We all thought we were in exclusive relationships, but we were just pieces in his twisted game. The scale of Brian's deception was staggering. He had managed to juggle multiple relationships simultaneously, keeping each woman in the dark about the others. He had created elaborate lies to explain his absences and busy schedule. Some women had even met his family, not realizing they were part of the act. As we pieced together our stories, a pattern emerged. Brian had tailored his personality to match what each woman was looking for. For me, he was the sensitive artist. For another, he was the ambitious businessman. He became whatever he needed to be to keep us hooked. In the weeks that followed, I struggled to come to terms with what had happened. I deleted all my dating apps and retreated from social media. Trust seemed like a foreign concept. How could I ever believe anyone again after this? One day, while scrolling through my emails, I'd noticed a message from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "The truth about Brian." Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside was a link to a private blog. As I clicked through, my jaw dropped. It was Brian's personal journal, detailing his exploits and manipulations. The blog was a goldmine of information. Brian had meticulously documented his conquests, strategies, and lies. He treated it like a game, keeping score of how many women he could juggle at once. There were charts, schedules, and even a point system for different levels of deception. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was like looking into the mind of a sociopath. Brian had no remorse, no guilt. He saw his victims as nothing more than pawns in his twisted game. The level of planning and calculation was chilling. As I dug deeper into the blog, I discovered something even more shocking. Brian wasn't working alone. He was part of a network of men who shared tips and techniques for manipulating women. They called themselves the Players' Circle, and they had members all over the country. I knew I had to do something with this information. I couldn't let Brian and his group continue to hurt innocent people. After discussing it with the other women in our support group, we decided to take action. We compiled all the evidence from the blog and our personal experiences. Then we reached out to a journalist who specialized in exposing online scams. She was immediately interested in our story and agreed to help us bring it to light. Over the next few months, we worked with the journalist to build a comprehensive expose. We tracked down more victims, gathered additional evidence, and even managed to infiltrate the Players' Circle forum. As we delved deeper into the Players' Circle, we uncovered a complex web of deceit that spanned across the country. These men had developed sophisticated techniques to manipulate women, including creating fake social media profiles, staging elaborate scenarios, and even hiring actors to play family members or friends. The more we uncovered, the more determined we became to expose the truth. We set up sting operations, catching some of the men in the act. We gathered testimonies from victims, some of whom had lost thousands of dollars to these scammers. But our investigation didn't come without risks. As we got closer to the truth, we started receiving threats. Anonymous messages warned us to back off, and some of us experienced strange occurrences. Cars following us, mysterious phone calls in the middle of the night. It was clear that the Players' Circle wasn't going to go down without a fight. Despite the intimidation tactics, we pressed on. We couldn't let fear stop us from exposing the truth and preventing more women from falling victim to these predators. As we prepared to publish our findings, tension mounted. We knew the story would cause a major shockwave, but we weren't prepared for the aftermath. The day the expose went live, it spread like wildfire across social media platforms. Within hours, it was the top trending topic nationwide. The fallout was immediate and intense. Dating apps scrambled to improve their security measures and verification processes. Law enforcement agencies launched investigations into the Players' Circle. Brian and several other key members went into hiding, their carefully constructed lives crumbling around them. But amidst the chaos, something remarkable happened. Women from all over the country began reaching out, sharing their own stories of deception and manipulation. Our small support group grew into a nationwide network of survivors, all united in their determination to fight back against online dating fraud. Our story isn't over yet, and I can't wait to see what the next chapter holds. I never expected to fall for an online scam. You hear about catfishing, but you always think it'll happen to someone else. Not me. I was too smart, too careful. At least that's what I told myself. It started innocently enough. I matched with Trish on a dating app last summer. Her profile said she was 29, worked in marketing, and loved hiking and travel. We hit it off right away, messaging for hours that first night. She was funny, smart, and seemed genuinely interested in me. We texted constantly over the next few weeks. I found myself checking my phone all the time, hoping for another message from her. She always knew how to make me smile or lift my mood after a tough day. I started to feel like I was falling for her, even though we hadn't met in person yet. Trish said she traveled a lot for work, which is why we couldn't meet up right away. But we'd video chat sometimes, and she looked just like her photos. Beautiful brown eyes, wavy dark hair, bright smile. I had no reason to be suspicious. After about a month, things got more intense. Our conversations turned flirty and explicitly bad. She sent me some revealing photos and asked for some in return. I was hesitant at first, but she made me feel comfortable. I trusted her. So I sent her a few pics, nothing too extreme, but definitely not something I'd want shared publicly. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags. The constant travel preventing us from meeting. The quick escalation in trading photos. But I was so caught up in the excitement and connection, I ignored my doubts. We carried on like this for months. I felt like I was in a real relationship, even though we'd never met in person. Trish had become such a big part of my life. I'd tell her about my day, ask her advice on work stuff, share my hopes and fears. I really thought I was falling in love. Then one night, everything changed. Trish called me, sounding upset. She said she needed to tell me something important. My stomach dropped as she started talking. She admitted that she wasn't really who she said she was. Her name wasn't even Trish. She was part of an organized catfishing ring that targeted men on dating apps. They'd build emotional connections over months, get compromising photos or information, then blackmail their victims for money. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My mind was reeling, trying to process what she was saying. She claimed she'd developed real feelings for me and couldn't go through with scamming me. She said she was done with that life and wanted to come clean. I didn't know what to believe. Part of me wanted to hang up and never speak to her again. But another part still cared for her, still wanted to believe in the connection we'd built. She sounded so sincere, so remorseful. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her in person. I told myself I just wanted closure, to see for myself if any of it had been real. We met at a coffee shop downtown. She looked similar to her photos, but not identical. She'd clearly used some flattering filters and angles in the pics she'd sent. She cried as she apologized again, swearing she was done with the scamming. She begged me to forgive her, said she wanted to try to build something real together. I was conflicted. The rational part of my brain said to run, but my heart wasn't ready to let go. Over the next few weeks, we started seeing each other regularly. It was strange at first, getting to know the real her. But in many ways, she was the same person I had fallen for online. Gradually, I started to trust her again. I wanted to believe people could change. Then the messages started. At first, just vague threats, saying they knew what I'd done and I'd be sorry. I tried to ignore them, assuming they were spam or random trolls. But they got more specific, mentioning details only Trish would know. I confronted her about it. She swore she wasn't involved, that her old associates must have found out about us somehow. She seemed genuinely afraid. We changed our phone numbers, thinking that would solve it. It didn't. The messages kept coming, now demanding money to make it stop. They threatened to send my private photos to my work, my family, everyone I knew. I was terrified. I couldn't eat or sleep, jumping every time my phone buzzed. Trish suggested we go to the police, but I was too embarrassed. I didn't want anyone to know how stupid I'd been. In a moment of panic, I sent them some money, hoping it would make it all go away. It only made things worse. Now they knew I'd pay, so the demands increased. I was in way over my head, with no idea how to get out. I felt completely trapped. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to do some dating online. I found an old social media account of Trish's that she probably thought was deleted. As I scrolled through, my blood ran cold. There were recent photos of her with other men, clearly on dates. She was still catfishing, still scamming. I realized then that this had all been part of the con. Her supposed confession and reformation was just another layer of manipulation. She was using my feelings for her to pull me in deeper, make me more vulnerable to the blackmail. I felt sick. How could I have been so blind? I'd let myself believe what I wanted to be true instead of seeing the reality that was right in front of me. I'd fallen for the oldest trick in the book, and now I was paying the price. I knew I had to get out, but I was scared. These people had so much leverage over me. What if they followed through on their threats? But I couldn't keep living like this, constantly afraid and being blood dry financially. In that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't let fear control me anymore. I'd rather face the consequences of my mistakes than continue being a victim. I blocked Trish's number and all the accounts that had been messaging me. But it wasn't over. The next day, I received a video call from an unknown number. When I answered, I saw Trish, but she looked different. Scared. There was a man next to her, his face just out of frame. He told me I had made a big mistake trying to cut them off. He said they knew where I lived, where I worked. If I didn't cooperate, they'd come for me. My mind raced. I couldn't tell if Trish was really in danger or if this was just another part of their act. Either way, I was in deeper than I'd ever imagined. I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. These people were dangerous and I was in way over my head. I hung up and immediately called the police. The police dealt with the situation in their own way and everything dialed down, but honestly, the worst experience of my life. I met Emma at a local coffee shop. She caught my eye immediately, cute, funny, and seemingly into all the same things as me. We hit it off right away, chatting for hours about our favorite bands, movies, and travel spots. By the end of that first meeting, I was smitten. Our relationship progressed quickly. Emma was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner. She loved the same obscure indie films, got excited about the same niche hobbies, and even shared my career aspirations. It felt too good to be true. As we spent more time together, I was constantly impressed by Emma's knowledge about me. She'd remember tiny details I'd mentioned in passing, like my favorite childhood snack or the name of my third-grade teacher. I thought she was just an incredibly attentive listener. Emma fit seamlessly into my life. She got along great with all my friends and family. She even seemed to know random facts about my hometown, despite never having visited. At the time, I didn't think much of it. One night, about 6 months into our relationship, Emma casually brought up a family vacation I'd taken as a kid. She described the beach house we'd stayed at in vivid detail. The color of the shutters, the creaky step on the back porch, even the name of the elderly couple next door. That's when the first alarm bells started ringing in my head. I was certain I'd never told her about that trip. I started paying closer attention after that night. Emma would drop little tidbits of information about my past that I knew for a fact I hadn't shared with her. She'd reference inside jokes with my college buddies. She knew the name of my first pet. Small things that didn't add up. My suspicions grew. I began digging into Emma's background, trying to verify the things she'd told me about herself. A lot of it checked out, but some details were fuzzy. When I pressed her on inconsistencies, she'd get defensive or quickly change the subject. I decided to do some deeper digging online. What I found chilled me to the bone. Emma had been following my social media accounts for years before we met. She'd systematically gone through and liked posts from ages ago. There were comments she'd left on my family members' photos from way back. The more I looked, the worse it got. Emma had joined the same online forums as me under different usernames. She'd been active in fan communities for my favorite bands. She'd even taken the same online courses I had. It was like she'd been studying me, crafting the perfect persona to match my interests. My blood ran cold when I found evidence that Emma had been contacting people from my past. Old classmates, ex-girlfriends, even a former teacher. She'd been pumping them for information about me under the guise of planning a surprise party. I felt sick to my stomach. The Emma I knew was a carefully constructed facade. She'd been stalking me for years, meticulously gathering data to shape herself into my ideal partner. Every shared interest, every inside joke, every coincidence, it had all been orchestrated. I couldn't confront her right away. I needed time to process what I discovered and figure out how to handle the situation. So I pretended everything was normal while I continued my investigation. I started paying attention to Emma's mannerisms, trying to spot cracks in her facade. Sometimes I'd catch a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes when I brought up a topic she wasn't fully prepared for. Other times, she'd hesitate just a fraction too long before responding to a question about her past. I began testing her, casually mentioning fake childhood memories or made-up friends. More often than not, Emma would play along, claiming to remember things that never happened. It was terrifying to watch her lies unfold in real time. As I dug deeper into Emma's real background, I uncovered more disturbing information. She'd done this before. There were other guys in other cities who'd had similar experiences. Emma would study them from afar, craft a persona to match their interests, then insert herself into their lives. When things inevitably fell apart, she'd disappear and move on to her next target. I found old social media profiles where Emma presented completely different personalities. In one, she was a hipster artist. In another, a fitness guru. She was like a changeling, changing her entire identity to match whatever guy she was pursuing at the time. The more I uncovered, the more paranoid I became. I started seeing Emma everywhere. At the grocery store, walking past my apartment, in the background of photos posted by friends. Was she still watching me? Had she ever really stopped? I knew I had to end things, but I was scared. How would Emma react when her carefully constructed world came crashing down? Would she become dangerous? I'd read stories about stalkers turning violent when rejected. I decided to confront Emma in a public place. I chose a busy cafe where we had one of our first dates. As soon as we sat down, I laid out everything I discovered. The years of online stalking, the fake personas, the other guy she'd done this to. Emma's reaction was not what I expected. She didn't cry or get angry. Instead, she smiled, a cold, empty smile that sent chills down my spine. I wondered how long it would take you to figure it out, she said calmly. You lasted longer than most. She stood up to leave, but not before delivering a chilling parting shot. You think you know everything about me now. But trust me, you've only scratched the surface. Sleep tight. In the weeks that followed, I was a nervous wreck. I changed all my passwords, locked down my social media, and warned my family and friends about Emma. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Strange things started happening. Packages I didn't order would show up at my door. My car alarm would go off in the middle of the night. I'd catch glimpses of someone who looked like Emma out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, they'd be gone. One night, I came home to find my apartment had been broken into. Nothing was stolen, but things had been moved around. On my bedside table was a framed photo I'd never seen before, a picture of Emma and me on our first date. A date I was certain no one had photographed. That's when I had to file a restraining order against her. I was so freaked out. I hope I never see her face again. I never expected to find myself in the middle of such a twisted situation. I matched with Wade on a dating app. His profile caught my eye, great smile, wee bio, and some cool travel photos. We hit it off right away, messaging back and forth for a few weeks before deciding to meet up for coffee. Our first date went surprisingly well. Wade was even more charming in person, and conversation flowed easily. He asked me out again before we even left the cafe, and I was excited to see where things might go. Over the next few months, we started spending more time together. Wade planned lots of cute dates, picnics in the park, hikes to scenic spots, fancy dinners at trendy restaurants. He always wanted to capture these moments with photos. At first, I thought it was sweet that he wanted to document our time together. But as things progressed, I started feeling a bit uneasy about how much Wade focused on getting the perfect shot. He'd spend ages setting up his camera and positioning us just right. Sometimes he'd ask me to change outfits or touch up my makeup to get the look he wanted. Our dates began to feel less like genuine experiences and more like carefully staged photo shoots. When I brought it up, Wade insisted it was just because he wanted to preserve our memories. He said the photos were only for us to look back on someday. I tried to push my doubts aside. After all, lots of couples take photos together, right? Maybe I was overthinking things. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Wade was always on his phone, even when we were supposed to be having quality time. He'd get annoyed if I didn't want to pose for pictures. Our conversations felt stilted and unnatural when we weren't in front of the camera. I started to wonder if there was any real connection between us at all. Things took a turn when I ran into Sarah, a mutual friend at a local coffee shop. We got to chatting, and she mentioned seeing some of Wade's recent Instagram posts. My stomach dropped as she gushed about how cute we looked together, how jealous she was of our picture-perfect relationship. The thing was, I had no idea Wade was posting photos of us online. He'd never mentioned having a big social media presence. Confused and a little freaked out, I pulled up his profile on my phone. What I saw made me feel sick. There were hundreds of photos of us together, carefully curated to show an idealized version of our relationship. Candid-looking shots of us laughing over breakfast in bed. Romantic sunset kisses on the beach. Cozy movie nights at home. Some of the captions even talked about our future plans together, things Wade and I had never actually discussed. I scrolled through in horror, realizing that many of these moments had never even happened. Wade had clearly edited and manipulated images to create scenes that looked intimate and real, but were entirely fabricated. Our whole relationship was nothing but a carefully constructed lie. As I dug deeper, I discovered Wade had quite a following online. He was presenting himself as a relationship guru, giving advice to other couples and promoting various products. There were even sponsored posts where he talked about how certain items had improved our love life or strengthened our bond. I felt utterly betrayed and violated. All those times I reluctantly posed for photos, thinking they were just for us. Wade had been using me as a prop to build his brand and make money. He'd orchestrated our entire relationship for his own gain, with no regard for my feelings or privacy. Shaking, I confronted Wade about what I had found. He tried to downplay it at first, saying it wasn't a big deal and that lots of people curate their image online. When I pressed further, he got defensive and angry. He accused me of overreacting and tried to make me feel guilty for ruining things between us. In that moment, I saw Wade's true colors. He didn't care about me at all. I was just a means to an end for him. A convenient actress to play the role of the perfect girlfriend in his manufactured online world. The realization was devastating. I broke things off immediately, but the ordeal was far from over. Wade had shared so much of our supposed life together online that it was hard to escape. Mutual friends and even strangers would ask about our relationship, not realizing it had all been fake. I had to repeatedly explain the situation and relive the hurt. As I tried to move on, I discovered that Wade's deception ran even deeper than I'd initially thought. He'd been selling our photos and videos to various websites and brands, marketing them as authentic glimpses into a young couple's life. Some companies had even used our images in their ad campaigns, thinking we were real relationship goals. I felt like I was living in some bizarre alternate reality. Everywhere I looked, I saw traces of the fake life Wade had created for us. It was surreal to see our faces on billboards and in magazine ads, knowing that none of it was real. The situation took a darker turn when I started receiving messages from other women who claimed they also dated Wade. It turned out he'd been running the same scam with multiple partners, creating different online personas for each relationship. He carefully managed his schedule to keep us all separate, using each of us to create content for his various social media accounts and sponsorship deals. I was horrified to learn how calculated and widespread Wade's deception had been. It wasn't just about building a fake perfect relationship. He created an entire network of false narratives and identities, all for his own profit and fame. As the truth came to light, Wade's carefully constructed house of cards began to crumble. Sponsors pulled out, followers turned against him, and his reputation as a relationship expert was shattered. The damage he'd done to me and the other women he'd used remained. I never expected to fall for someone like Keith. He swept me off my feet from the moment we met. Tall, handsome, and charming, he seemed too good to be true. Our first date was at a cozy cafe. We talked for hours, and Keith remembered every detail I shared. He asked such thoughtful questions, I felt like the center of his world. I left that night feeling giddy with excitement. As we continued dating, Keith's attentiveness only grew. He'd surprise me with my favorite flowers at work or leave sweet notes in my bag. Our dates were always perfectly planned, hitting all my interests. I kept waiting for a flaw to appear, but Keith remained flawless. Months flew by and I was happier than ever. My friends envied our relationship, always gushing about how caring Keith was. I felt like I'd won the lottery in love. But then small oddities started to catch my attention. Keith would mention things about me that I couldn't remember telling him. He'd always seemed to know my whereabouts, even when plans changed last minute. At first, I dismissed these as coincidences or good memory on his part. The uneasy feeling grew, though. I'd catch Keith intensely focused on his phone, only to quickly hide it when I approached. He became oddly protective of his devices, never letting me near them. I tried to ignore my growing paranoia. Keith was perfect in every other way, but the nagging sense that something was off would leave me. One night, Keith fell asleep early during our movie night. His phone sat on the coffee table, tempting me. Against my better judgment, I picked it up with trembling hands. What I found chilled me to the bone. Keith's phone was loaded with tracking apps and spyware. Digging deeper, I uncovered months of detailed logs tracking my every move. He had records of everywhere I went, everyone I talked to, and even transcripts of my conversations. I felt physically ill. How could the man I thought I knew do this? I carefully replaced the phone, trying to act normal while my mind raced. Over the next few days, I pieced together the horrifying truth. Keith had used all the data he collected to craft his perfect persona. He knew exactly what to say and do to win me over. Our entire relationship was built on manipulation. But why? What was Keith's endgame? I was terrified to confront him, unsure of what he might do. So I pretended everything was fine while secretly investigating his motives. It didn't take long to uncover his sinister plan. Keith intended to use all the information he gathered to blackmail me. He had dirt on my friends and family too. His ultimate goal was complete control over my life. The betrayal and violation I felt were overwhelming. The man I thought I loved was nothing but a calculating predator. I knew I had to escape, but I was terrified of the consequences if I tried to leave. I confided in my best friend, Sarah, who helped me formulate a plan. We spent nights gathering evidence of Keith's illegal activities, careful not to tip him off. As we dug deeper, we uncovered a horrifying truth. I wasn't Keith's first victim. He had a history of stalking and manipulating women, always staying just within legal bounds to avoid prosecution. Our breakthrough came when we found a hidden folder on Keith's laptop. It contained detailed plans for his projects, women he targeted for manipulation and control. I was just the latest in a long line of victims. With this evidence in hand, we decided to confront Keith. I arranged a meeting at a public cafe with Sarah and a few trusted friends nearby for support. Keith arrived, all smiles and charm as usual. But as I started to reveal what I knew, his demeanor changed. His eyes turned cold, his smile twisted into a sneer. He leaned in close, his voice low and threatening. He told me he knew I'd been snooping and that I had no idea what I was up against. He hinted at connections with powerful people who could make my life miserable if I didn't cooperate. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I stood my ground. I told Keith I had copies of all his files, and that if anything happened to me, they'd be released to the police and media. For a moment, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes, but it quickly vanished, replaced by a calculated look. He laughed, telling me I was in way over my head. As he got up to leave, he casually mentioned how unfortunate it would be if my parents' financial troubles became public knowledge or if my brother's past indiscretions came to light. I sat there, shaken, as Keith walked away. I realized this was far from over. Keith wasn't going to give up his control easily. Over the next few weeks, strange things started happening. My social media accounts were hacked. Rumors about me started spreading at work. My car was vandalized. I knew it was Keith, but I had no proof. He was always careful to maintain plausible deniability. The stress was taking its toll. I became paranoid, jumping at every sound, constantly looking over my shoulder. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. My friends were worried, but I was too scared to tell them the full extent of what was happening. Then one night, I received an anonymous email. It contained a video of me in my apartment, clearly taken without my knowledge. The message was clear. Keith could get to me anytime, anywhere. I was at my breaking point. I felt trapped with no way out. But then, unexpectedly, help came from an unlikely source. A woman contacted me through a secure messaging app. She said she was one of Keith's former victims and had been following my case. She offered to help, saying she had information that could bring Keith down. At first, I was skeptical. But as she shared her story, I realized she was genuine. She had been through the same nightmare I was living. Together, we started building a case against Keith. We connected with other victims, gathered evidence, and worked with a lawyer who specialized in stalking cases. It was a long, difficult process. Keith fought back hard, using every trick and connection he had to discredit us. There were times I wanted to give up, to just disappear and start a new life somewhere else.
Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.